Welcome to part 3 of the Linux fundamental course, and in this video we are going to look at how to manage users and groups on your Linux system. So basically we started with some basic commands like who am I to check the currently logged in user, and today I want to add more commands that are used in user management. For example, we have a command called ID, and it's going to show you the ID of that particular user. Then the other command we checked was the W command, which is going to tell us the active user or the user that is using the system, or we can get a list of users if we have multiple users that are using the system. So currently we only have one user that is using the system, and you can see the name of that user is Kali. Okay, so we looked at these two commands in the previous class. This is a new command, the ID command. So maybe we can explore that ID command, then I'm going to explain the rest of the other commands. The ID is going to show the ID or the user ID of the logged in user and the groups that that particular user belongs to, together with their group IDs. Okay, so basically, to understand what we are seeing here, there is a command called groups, and that command is used to show the groups that that particular user belongs to. So a user can belong to multiple groups. A single user can belong to multiple groups. You can see here, this user that I'm logged in as belongs to a group called students, AD, dial-out, CD-ROM, floppy, sudo, audio, deep, video, and all those other groups. So most of these groups are services that that particular user can use, and to be able to use those services, that user needs to belong to that particular group. I'll explain all the Linux security systems later so that you can understand why we need to have group IDs and user IDs. So up here you can see we have the user ID, which is indicated by the UID. Then here we have the GID, which stands for the group ID. So you can see the user ID is 1000 and the group ID which this user belongs to. The user belongs to a group called students. You can see we have 1004. Okay, then these are the other group IDs that that particular user belongs to. So how do you create a user on your Linux system? Okay, how do you create a user? So to create a user, we use a command called useradd. So it's a very simple command. Then the name of the user that you want to add. So I want to add a user called hacker. I want to add a user called hacker. Okay, so you type useradd then hacker. But you can see it's telling us that that user already exists. Okay, so you can't create a user that exists. Okay, so let's create another user. Okay, so I'm going to create a user called viewer, and you can see it's telling me that permission denied. So one thing to note, you need privileges to be able to add users to your system. When I talk about privileges, I'm talking about permissions. So in the next video, we'll be covering privileges and permissions. So basically, to explain it before the next video, permissions are what you can do with different files and directories, what you can do. Then privileges are what services you can do, or what services are you allowed to access on your system. So to add a user, you need to have permissions to edit this particular file. Okay, we have a file called passwd. I'll come back to that file and explain what it is. So to be able to add a user to a system, you need permission to edit this particular file. So to borrow permission or to get permissions from a user called the root user, which is the administrator of this system, you need to use a command called sudo. So the sudo command is used to borrow permission from the root user so that you can perform administrative tasks. For example, creating or adding users to your system. So I'm going to say sudo useradd. Then we are going to create a user called viewer. Okay, then it's going to ask for the password. So I'm going to type my password. And with that, you'll have added a new user to your machine. Okay, let's add another user. Okay, so I've created a user called Jacob. How do we know that these users have been created on our system? How do we verify that now we have these users in our system? So there is this file I mentioned earlier, the passwd file. So the passwd file is a file that contains a list of users that are on that particular system, okay? So to access it, we have to navigate to the etc directory, or we can just read the content that are inside that particular file using the cat command, as we discussed in the previous video. So cat is used to read the contents that are inside the file. So I'm going to say cat /etc/passwd, and with that you can see I'm able to see or to read the content that are inside that permission, that are inside that file. Okay, so up here you can see we have the root user. Okay, I told you is the system administrator. Then down here we have a list of users. So one thing you need to know about the passwd, it contains a list of a lot of users. But how do you separate real users from services? Because it contains a list of users and services. So you can see up here we have the root user, and then down here all of these are services. I'm going to explain to you how I know that they are services up to here. Okay, all of those are services. Now the real users, they start from here. Okay, so you can see our first user is Carly, then we have Hacker, then we have Brian, we have Viewer, and Jacob. So these are the two users that we created, meaning that the command worked. Okay, yeah, so we added two new users to our system. So the way that to differentiate a user from a service, you can use the user ID. Okay, so real users, they start with an ID of 1000 and below. Okay, you can see Carly starts with an ID of 1000. You can see 1000. Then Hacker has an ID of 1001. Brian has an ID of 1003. Then Viewer has an ID of 1004, and then Jacob has an ID of 1005. Then these other IDs, these are the group IDs. Okay, these are the group IDs. We'll talk about groups later. So these are the group IDs. Then another way to identify services from users, you can see down here or at the end here, we have no login, no login, no login. Okay, meaning that that's a service. You can't log in as a user. Okay, but for the users, we have this what we call a shell. We'll discuss about shells later. Okay, you can see we have the user shell here at the end. Okay, then we also have the location for their home directory here. You can see this is the location for their home directory. So each user must have a home when it comes to the Linux system. Each user must have their own home, okay? There is a command that we ran, the pwd command, and we saw that we're inside the /home/Carly. So that is the home for that particular logged in user. So that's how you create a user. So how do you delete or how do you remove a user from our system? Okay, I want us to delete this user called Hacker from our system because we don't need hackers in our system. So to delete a user, we still need to use the sudo command. Okay, then we are going to say userdel or user delete, then the name of the user that we want to delete. So for our case, we have Hacker. And with that, we'll have removed that user called Hacker. To confirm, we need to read the etc passwd file. And you can see down here, we don't have the Hacker user. So that's how you add and delete users on a system. Let's talk about groups. How do we create groups and delete groups on our system? So to add groups in our system, we use a command called groupadd. Okay, we use a command called groupadd to add groups to our system. Then the name of the group. So I want to create a group called YouTube. Okay, I want to create a group called YouTube. So if I say enter, you can see I still don't have permission to edit this particular file called /etc/group. So at the beginning or in the previous video, we talked about this file and I told you it's a file that contains a list of groups that are available on our system. So if I can just cut that particular file, so /etc/group, Okay, so you can see here we have a list of groups that are on our system. Another thing to note, when you create a user, it's going to create a group with the same name as the user. Okay, so down here you can see our two users that we added, viewer and Jacob, and you can see we also have groups called viewer and Jacob, and this is their group ID at the end here. So these numbers that you can see here, these are the group IDs. Okay, so we need special privileges to create groups. So I'm going to say sudo group add, then we can add our group called YouTube. Okay, so if I cut that particular file again, down here you can see we have our new group called YouTube, which has a group ID or GID of 1000 and 1007. Okay, so I want us to add these two users, viewer and Jacob, to this group called YouTube. Okay, but before we do that, we need to check which groups those two users belong to. Okay, so to do that, we use the groups command. So the name of the file is group, but the command is groups. Okay, so groups, then viewer. Okay, you can see viewer only belongs to a single group. I told you that when you create a user, it's going to create a group with the same username. And if we check group, we want to add them to a group called YouTube. So to do that, we still need to use the sudo command because we need permission to modify users. And then there is a command called usermod. So usermod is used to modify users. For example, you can change the username from one name to another. You can change the location of their home directory and etc. We'll cover that later. So usermod is used to modify user. In our case, we want to add viewer and Jacob to a group called YouTube. So we are going to say sudo usermod, then -a for add, then capital G for the group. Then we are going to give the group name. So we are going to say YouTube is the name of our group. Then we want to add this user called viewer. Okay, with that it will have added the viewer user to a group called YouTube. We'll do the same. So I'm going to delete viewer and then I'm going to say Jacob. And with that we'll have added our two users to a group called YouTube. So we can just check, can just click the up button and you can see now viewer belongs to a group called viewer and YouTube. And you can also check for Jacob. You can also see Jacob belongs to the same group. So I want to discuss this command called usermod. If I say man usermod, we are presented by the manual page. So the man command is used to display manual pages for different commands and tools on your system. So usermod is used to modify a user account. Okay, and you can see using -a add the user to the supplement group. Okay, we saw that when we are adding groups. And you can also specify the home directory for that particular user. And you can see we have the groups command. Okay, so that is the usermod command. So to exit the man page, you just press Q and you'll have exited the man page. How do you delete a group? Okay, so we have created the groups. How do you delete the groups? So here we have this list of groups, and then if I say cat/etc/group, you can see our YouTube group has viewer and Jacob as their participants there. Okay, so I want to create a new group so that I can show you how to delete groups. Okay, so I'm going to say sudo group add, then I'm just going to call it test. Okay, so we have created a group called test. So how do you delete a group? So we're going to say sudo group del. Okay, group del, then we can say test. Okay, we want to delete a group called test. And with that, we'll have deleted the group called test. That's it for this user and group management video. I will see you in the next video. Peace.